not having basketball to look forward to, or school, really. I mean, I went to grad school, but once you graduate, there's only but so much graduating you can do before it's like, all right, it's the world, and the world isn't measured by performance and grades and turning things in on time. I mean, I guess a little bit, but you know what I mean? There's a different, it's a different ball game.
Hello and welcome to the Authentic Wednesday podcast. Each week, my guest and I share our vulnerable behind-the-scenes stories of giving ourselves permission to take off our masks, let go of expectations, and embrace our own path of freedom and authentic connection. I am your host, Bianca Hughes, a lover of authenticity. Hello and welcome back to the Authentic Wednesday podcast. It is a pleasure to have you listening to the podcast. If this is your first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is episode 62 and I have a guest on the podcast today. We're going to get into such a great and much needed conversation. My guest today is Kristen Feemster. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified personal trainer, and the founder of B3, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. As an entrepreneur, she splits her time between her private practice, seeing individuals and couples, and working with clients through her coaching program, Be Well. Be Well is a wellness program created to help women develop a sustainable lifestyle that supports their physical and mental well-being. Fun fact, Kristen is a former college athlete and experienced the NCAA basketball tournament her junior year. Kristen also got sober from alcohol addiction at 26 years of age. And we're really going to get into this story and her journey of recovery and just learning so many truths and challenges that we experience and kind of what can lead us to addictions. And so let's go ahead and get into the conversation. Hello, Kristen, and welcome to the Authentic Wednesday podcast.
Hi, thank you, Bianca, for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. So I tell people all the time that I kind of like go through Instagram and stalk people because that's how I find people's stories and how I find so many interesting people. So that's one way I found you, but like low key, I was looking for a therapist for somebody else in North Carolina, and that's how I also.
Oh wow!
I needed a referral in Charlotte, and like I go on Instagram, and then that's how I found you, and then I just like stalked your whole page after all I saw you doing all these amazing stuff. So I just want to give you props for that.
Thank you. Yeah, after all the stalking, here we are. I appreciate it.
Yes. People like, you stalk? Yes, I just like to know what people are saying. So, my favorite question I always like to ask all the guests on the show: what does authenticity mean to you?
Authenticity to me means just a level of honesty, and something that I'll kind of share, as we talk, but like being honest with yourself. And I think that for me in my journey, that was maybe the hardest part, is to be authentic with me. And so to me, it's about having that unrelenting honesty to acknowledge things within myself so that I can own them, work through them, show them off, whatever that might be, you know what I mean? But first starting with being authentic with me and true to myself.
Yeah, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, I'm kind of wondering, but have you always been authentic?
No, definitely not. No, that's been a journey. I think it ebbs and flows, and man, we could get into all kinds of different areas of this as far as, being a Black woman and what it means to show up authentically in certain spaces, or for me and my experience of perfectionism in general, allowing myself to be imperfect in all the many ways. But no, that has not always been my default setting, I would say.
So what was your default setting? Like, what was your mask that, or if you can name a couple of masks maybe perhaps you wore before you started to go into more authenticity?
I think that, so a little bit about me. I was a basketball player up until college. I played through my college career, and then stopped, as most athletes do after that. But I played basketball from about age 4 or 5 until I
Mm.
was 21, 22. And so that was a large chunk of my time, my identity, my efforts, everything, went into that, which was actually very helpful to me, you know what I mean, overall. But I think that the pressure and the I had support, but to whom much is given, much is required, because it's like the
Mm-hmm.
better you get, the more you have to kind of keep at that same level. And so I would say, like, notably for me, I think my confidence around being a basketball player, or just being good at something to a point where people are noticing and not knowing how to handle that. I think that a lot of times, throughout my experience of basketball, my first mask was, I'm good. This isn't about, you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm good at this. I'm killing it. When really I was afraid a lot of the time. I was afraid to mess up, afraid to not be good enough. I come from a small town. So at the time, there's just a lot of eyeballs on like what I was doing. It's not like it was like a larger area where there's so many different things going on. It was very much so focused on my team. We had a couple of good players at one time. And so I remember, yeah, wearing that mask to kind of protect the more insecure parts of myself. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I think that's like
Yeah.
so important for people to know, because the perception, of course, someone in the public eye, especially an athlete, and for them, you're like, oh my God, you're amazing from their standpoint. And you're like, oh my God, I'm terrified.
Yeah, I'm terrified that I won't be you know what I mean, that whatever level you get to, that there's a requirement that you take your, investment up a notch, so I started out, playing league ball with, most kids do. And then when I went to high school, I was at the end of my freshman year, moved up to varsity. Whoa, wait a minute now. Whoa, this is like a larger, a larger stage. And then, getting a scholarship to college, again, another big stage to step on. And all the while feeling like, my esteem and my worth was in the balance with that. And I think that's what makes the difference now, is that I can do good things. I can have an identity that's even rooted in certain things. That's okay. But my esteem and my self-worth as a woman is not solely dependent on how I show up in those different spaces. And so I would say that type of issue showed up for me with basketball, but also in my career, and in school as well.
It's a lot of pressure, a lot of performing,
Mm-hmm.
is what I'm hearing. Just a constant kind of like performance. It's almost as like you said, my worth is in how I perform.
Right.
Back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like with all of that, the performance from age 4 all the way up to, your 20s, to your college career, and then it stopped. And correct me if I'm wrong,
Right.
but is that where so for you, where your story starts in terms of where the drinking, is that where it started to increase at
Yeah.
that point, or was it before that?
Right. I would definitely say that's where, around my senior year, towards the end of my senior year, I think that's where, um, so a little backstory, my junior year of college, we made it to the March Madness NCAA tournament, a huge
Mm.
deal in the basketball world. And it was great. Cloud nine, amazing. Everybody's having fun. It's the best year ever. And then we had some significant changes my senior year. And so and we weren't as good. We didn't make it that far. We didn't win that many games. And so I would say that I think in hindsight, a little bit more, I had always been a drinker, partier, within reason. I think the structure that basketball provided kind of contained some things that maybe otherwise would have been a little bit more, throughout, earlier college years. But I think in hindsight, I noticed where the switch went from being more of a social thing to more of a coping thing, to just what we talked about, relieve the pressure and to not think so much about, what I was going to do next, as far as like, not having basketball to look forward to, or school, really. I mean, I went to grad school, but once you graduate, there's only but so much graduating you can do before it's like, all right, it's the world, and the world isn't measured by performance and grades and turning things in on time. I mean, I guess a little bit, but you know what I mean? There's a different, it's a different ball game. So yeah, I think that's definitely when I started to fill in the gaps of my self-esteem and just generally my time, with more drinking, which of course, it's a progressive situation, over the course of several years, to where, but in hindsight, I'm like, oh yeah, I can clearly see, how that progressed. Wow. But I think the end of basketball and just really having an identity crisis in that way, definitely was the catalyst, for sure.
So what did it feel like for you? Because I always like to talk to my own clients and be like, well, what's the benefits? What were the benefits? Even though we know long term and when you wake up and all these consequences, we know that. But in the moment, there's a benefit. What were those benefits for you, if any?
Yeah, I think the benefit was, more or less, just being able to relax and let my hair down, have a little bit more fun, me being, and I think this is kind of in your lane too, as far as anxiety and perfectionism and just the high functioning aspect of that. It's really hard to step outside of that rigid mindset in a lot of ways. And so for me, even before it became something that was like, definitely I'm coping with depression right now, or I'm trying to cope with, specifically, like even before then, I think that what I enjoyed about alcohol the most was being able to just, let all that go, not think so much about it, calm down, chill out, you know what I mean? And just have a good time, and remove the inner critic and remove the pressures that I thought were coming from the outside, but were really coming from within as well. You know what I mean? To just kind of shut all of that off for a while and enjoy life, And so, yeah, it feels weird to kind of talk about, I guess, what purpose it served, but I also think that it's important to know that, because once you enter recovery, you have to learn how to do that organically, and that you can't, and so it's really important. It is good to kind of remember, what the whole reason was for reaching for alcohol in the beginning. And loneliness. I think that, dealing with loneliness in sobriety is different than you being lonely with something to drink. And I'm not trying to advocate or, advertise this, but it's a different kind of it's like, it can be fun. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, this is, it kind of masks the full experience of loneliness and being isolated, which I felt in grad school, going from having such a team. Now, when you play basketball, I mean, it's not a solo sport. It's not like tennis or golf. You have a built-in friend group and support system and people who know what's going on with you. And think I did that from age 5 all the way up to 22. And then now when you go into grad school at a school where you don't know anyone, which was the case for me, who are you hanging with? Who are your friends? Like, how are you bridging that gap, And so I think at that point, alcohol was a companion in that sort of way too.
That's so interesting. Because I heard a lot of people describe that, because I've worked in I do work with clients with substance abuse, but also worked in a hospital with substance abuse, which I love, working with the people with addiction.
I could say we're an interesting bunch.
Very great personalities. Y'all are like full of life. Like, it's great. I love it. But it was always like, I'm losing a best friend, or alcohol is my best friend, or the
Mm-hmm.
drug is my best friend. But I definitely heard that a lot more with the alcohol, that alcohol was like their best friend, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
losing a best friend. And it's even interesting as you're talking about that transition, which is huge. It's almost, it was like a grief, a loss, like not having basketball. And it
Oh
kind
yeah.
of, yeah, and it reminded me of when people also, when they retire, because you know, a retirement is another age where people start drinking a lot, because it's like, well, I did all this, now what do I do? And it
Mm-hmm.
kind of sounded like you had all of that also going on, like this kind of like retirement from basketball, this loss of basketball, so now you pick up the alcohol because I need another friend. It's like a lot of grief, like, which I think
Oh
adds.
yeah. Definitely, definitely. And to frame it up that way, I think, yeah, absolutely, a grieving process, and something that I don't think, um, I think just, I don't think it's anyone's intentional responsibility, or anyone's fault, but like, I think that a lot of athletes are not prepared for what that looks like and what that feels like. I think that when you're, when you're playing a sport, um, and especially, I just want to say, I mean, sports at any level are great, but there's something about the shift from high school to college as far as what your investment is. Okay, so we're talking 3 hours a day of practice, and then your classes are catered specifically for your basket. It's like a job. I mean, I don't know if you've in the world today, they're now talking about paying college athletes and how much it actually is like a full-time job. And so I think that, for me, that though I'd been playing basketball the whole time, I think just that entire shift in order to make space for it, and my, like I said, my classes and when and where I did everything was shaped around it. I think that college athletes aren't really prepared with, okay, so now what do I do, when that is no longer needed and that structure is no longer there, and we don't really, I don't remember any talks about grief, experiencing grief once a college, once your career is over with. It's kind of just like that last buzzer goes off, and it's like, well, you've done a great job, and you know what I mean. And there's some celebratory things, but as far as working with the sad, grieving aspects of it, there really isn't anything.
Sounds like a good niche.
It it does. It really does.
It does. It sounds like a
That's a
good
part.
niche.
Yeah, that's a part of what I'm getting into now, and what my business B3 is for, which I assume we'll talk about at some point. But is all the many ways that the transition can be a struggle for me personally. I've always enjoyed exercise by way of playing a lot. I love being active, I guess I
Mm-hmm.
should say.
Mm-hmm.
And so another thing transitioning into post career is, what does it even mean to exercise and be active anymore? It was always kind of structured in a way where, like, this is what you're doing and this is why. And so I had a hard time finding like a balance between not overdoing it, not hurting myself, not pushing myself, because hey, there's no game to prepare for it. Like, you're just working out because you
Yeah.
want to work out, you know what I mean? And I think, again, another thing that I think many athletes struggle with is how to, um, recalibrate all of that
Yeah.
after a career is over, so.
Wow. So
Mhm.
when did you start to feel like, or realize that the alcohol, how long did that take for you to be like, I think this is becoming a problem? And would you call yourself an alcoholic, or would you say you had a drinking problem? How would you kind of view that?
So I would say, I'm going to go ahead and like put some cushion on my when so I drank for 12 years total. Well, from my first drink to my last drink was a 12-year span. I would say that at around age 21 was 12. Yeah, that's when it was. Sorry, I'm like calculating, but I would say that for about 5 or 6 years, I would say that I was kind of on that more specific path to having at least a drinking problem. And as far as the label of alcoholic, I'm kind of indifferent towards it. I started my recovery in AA. So of course that was a given with them, with that 12-step route to call yourself an alcoholic. I don't necessarily have any qualms about it. But I don't, it's not a normal part of my language. When I talk about my drinking, I'll say, I'm recovering from an alcohol addiction or, something like that. But I don't typically use the I'm an alcoholic phrase often. I'm not offended. I know there's like some discrepancy on that. I wouldn't be offended, but it's just not a regular part of my language. So, I think that some of the things that I noticed for me, again, things are so much different hindsight than they are in the moment. Because I think I went to grad school. And so that gave me another 2-year extension of my little school bubble, my built-in identity bubble of being a student, being a star student. And so, but, I definitely can see where my drinking increased during that time. And the more you drink, maybe in our culture, or at least in college, your tolerance being high is like bragging rights. Like, oh, you can hold your liquor, or, oh, I can, it was kind of like a badge of honor. Yeah. But now when I know about, my tolerance increasing meant that my body increasingly needed more, and was becoming dependent on getting that amount, And so I noticed that my tolerance increased. I noticed that my frequency of drinking almost immediately, going into grad school, was more just by sheer having more free time. And of course that progresses to drinking nightly. And then it's not just 2 drinks or 3 drinks, it's 4 or 5, because my tolerance is increasing. And so that kind of thing continued to progress over the course of, like I said, 4 years, to a point where the breaking point for me was my good old perfectionist mask that I would wear was like no longer covering for me, So a lot of things for me in recovery, I had to like almost update people that I had a drinking problem, because they were like, what, when was this? Because again, the persona is that I have it all together, that I'm good, my tolerance is high, so you can't even really tell if I'm drinking or if I'm not, and that sort of thing. And so the breaking point really, or like the awakening moment for me was like, oh, I'm not able to like keep myself together, and like this drinking problem is outgrowing me in that regard, or is running sheer ahead of me, as far as being out of control. Yeah, out of control. I'm getting out of control. And so I think that, in the final days and months leading up to when I decided to stop, I was starting to notice more consequences outside of just personal ones. Personal consequences would be hangovers, your house not being as upkept, as it would have normally been, forgetting things, but those were all kind of like contained personal ones, and when I talk about other consequences, I was concerned for getting a DUI, or what if I harm someone driving, or what if, just different things like that started to be more so on the table. None of that happened to me, thank goodness. But I was like, I could totally see how this just goes left from here. You know what I mean? And I didn't want that. I didn't want that for myself. So, yeah.
So you went and got help?
I got sober in a 12-step program. And so, yeah, so I did not seek formal treatment during that time, or therapy of any kind. I had been in therapy off and on. Was actually in therapy at one point while I was still drinking. Wasn't ready. Can see kind of where there were some things there, but I wasn't ready. And then when I got sober, I went straight into 12-step and just really did the full 12-step life of, regular meetings, sponsorship. I do kind of laugh at how, my innate desire to be a student, like same thing with
yep
same thing with the 12 step, like what do you need me to do, like following directions,
I say that a lot to people
Mm-hmm.
who are in recovery. I'll be like, that perfectionism towards your recovery.
Right, which is a whole thing to work through. It definitely
Mm-hmm.
is a whole thing to work through. But at the time, it did kind of give me that drive to to fully immerse myself in something that may have otherwise, not worked out for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it did. I completely surrounded myself with recovery support, whether that be 12 step. I got back involved in my local church, and they had a women in sobriety, a life group, got plugged into that. This is where I started working on my relationship with exercise and my love for fitness, and started working out with an accountability partner 3 days a week, and just really try to keep myself busy, but also get back to the things that kept me well, or would keep me well, that I. Mm-hmm.
So were you concerned, and maybe still concerned, that might come up about the stigmas associated
Yes.
with drinking, just in general, and things like that, and as a woman and then as a Black woman?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember having a hard time going into recovery meetings. And I remember having a conversation with my sponsor about it fairly early on. And I was like, I can't walk in. Like, I'm just so anxious about walking in. And she was, a white woman. And so she tried to like talk me through it as best as she knew how. But she's like, it's just everybody's in there for the same reasons. And it was all good advice, but it was missing the point of I was the only Black person walking into those meetings. And I'm 6 foot. At that point, I had an afro. I mean, there is no me just sliding in the back and being able to have my own process with that. You know what I'm saying? And so in hindsight, I can see where that was a part of it, like going into spaces and not seeing any other, well, maybe a few Black men, maybe, but rarely a Black woman, and if I did, how, I mean, addiction is tricky, right? So one day they're here, one day they're not. And so it was kind of hard to like, there wasn't enough of us to have enough of us who were sober long enough to actually form those relationships within that. And that's just the area that I live in, where that was the case. I know that's not the case everywhere, but I definitely had some different challenges being Black in those spaces. Mm-hmm.
Do you still face some stigmas, or do you still feel uncomfortable now, or is it different for you now?
No, now, in general, to answer your question, I was concerned with stigmas, maybe professionally, for sure. But I think that, but I also, being in the field, I knew that there was some privacy around that for me. You know what I'm saying? I guess just from knowing where I work versus where I can go get help, and kind of being able to create those like separations for myself, and also knowing my rights is around some of that stuff was helpful. My family, I come from a family of I'm not going to say a family of alcoholics, but alcoholism runs in my family. We'll say that. And so I kind of knew about it from there. And, I knew that I didn't want that to be the route that I went, you know what I mean? And so, though I had some concerns about it, I knew that the concerns and the stigma and the whatever was only going to weigh worse on me, weigh heavier on me, the drunker I stayed. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the more you go down this path, the more consequences. It's like there's no way out other than to just get sober and do it that way. And so I was kind of willing to take that chance for the hope of being done with it, and no longer, I mean, not being done with it, but to stop the cycle, And so Stigmas, my care for the stigmas around alcoholism. I don't know. I guess because I'm in the mental health field, I've just always seen it differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mhm,
But there is like, I mean, like you're saying, we might always not know, but like you said, I heard you say, and I heard you talk about this, about there not being a lot of Black people in the AA
mhm,
rooms, and then in
mhm,
particularly Black women, because I have been to some and sat in, and you're right, there are predominantly white people in there and predominantly white males in there. Of course, there are women groups and things like that, but it's interesting when I'm thinking about it, when it comes to the alcohol, it's not as prevalent, I guess, especially for that. But then what about your decision to share? Because we work in a field,
mhm,
you know,
mhm,
um, we're not meant to disclose and things like that, although, I have my own opinions on that. But
mhm, mhm. Me too. Mhm,
I have my own opinions on that. But you did, because if we go into your Facebook, group, and people can look, they can find out that you're in recovery, which I don't personally feel like it's a bad thing, but just as a professional, a mental health
mhm.
professional, not necessarily people who are in recovery, but perhaps other therapists who are not in recovery. But how was that, and kind of that decision made for you? Um,
It was a scary one. I'll say that, so I've been sober 6 years now. And so this has been a long process. I think sometimes people, they find my Instagram or my public platforms at whatever stage, and they think that it's been like that since day one. And it's like, no, this is year 6 of being on the way to to sharing more openly. And I think that what happened for me is, very early on in my journey, when I was working on my walk with God and just like really staying connected spiritually, like renewing myself in that way, I kind of had like this, me and God had like this little conversation about this being used for good, and that like
mm,
there's no way this is just gonna that you're just gonna get sober in private and then just never, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like this thing that I kind of already knew was on me to share. It was just about me getting comfortable with me, which is why I say like authenticity is about, it doesn't matter, like you have to be comfortable with you. And
mm,
so I didn't want to do it from a performative standpoint, be like, hey, look at me, I'm sober,
mm,
just to kind of gain some sort of whatever. I wanted to do it because I had truly accepted and had fully embraced like this chapter in my life. And so for me, it was a slow, probably around year 2 or 3, I think, is when I started just sharing in smaller ways, that I was sober. Instead of saying, I'm not drinking right now, I'd
yeah,
say, I'm a sober person, just small ways that you start to just like own it for
yeah,
yourself. And I had some job transitions, so I never really had to announce myself or tell, like, the place
mm-hmm,
that I got sober was not the place that I was working at the time, but I started to seek out employment at treatment centers. And so that was a part of my interview, was to say, hey, my reason for being here, my reason that I'm led to this facility or this field is because I too have had a drinking problem, and I'm a sober person, and just want to immerse myself in helping other people. And so it was a slow build. It was a slow build to kind of just, now it's just like, it's such a miracle, and it always has been. But it's just like, once I started to realize, this is like some sort of miracle that you're just like hiding from everybody. Like, tell somebody what has happened, tell
mm,
somebody. And so I think that was kind of overall helped me, because it's like the shame was leaving. The shame of what I had done or said, or secrets that that was starting to fade. And then all I could see was like this sheer transformation of my entire life that I hadn't told anybody about, you
yeah,
know?
wow,
And so that really helped me to feel more comfortable and like empowered to say, no, somebody needs to hear that this is possible at your age, with your skin color, as a woman. Someone needs to know that this is possible.
wow, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of like, just to wrap up, tell us where you are now and how you're kind of using your experience in your everyday life?
So now I am in private practice here based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And for a couple of years, I worked at some treatment centers for substance abuse and, did some work there. But I really felt like I wanted to branch out into my own vision for what blending this idea of a mental and physical health together, what that could look like. And it's really kind of outside of the typical structures of, mental health, and even the treatment centers, they add a little bit of, holistic services. But I really just felt like I wanted to, really see what this could be, to be at that intersection and have some dialogue around how movement and being active and how mind and body are just constantly in communication and constantly feeding off of each other. And plus it was such an important part of my life, my recovery journey, everything, and so I wanted to find a way to bridge that gap. And so now what I do in my work in private practice, and I also have coaching programs that I do, is help women with the same goals. Not all of them are sober women, but for the most part, there's been an identified vice or cycle of behavior or habit or something that they are really feeling trapped by, or controlled by, and they want to be free of it. And that's the essence of what I do, whether that be emotional eating, whether that be a substance issue, smoking, like something that they're wanting to kind of work through, exercise issues, and like, I need to break out of this cycle. I need to let this go, or have a different relationship with this person, place, or thing, and I want to get back to loving me. I want to get back to my self-care. I want to get back to, not feeling like I'm just getting by just to get by, but I'm living like a fruitful life. And so those are the types of women that I help, whether that be more so on the therapy side, where we're doing a lot of processing and understanding their family genogram and generational patterns and all that other stuff, or if it's on the coaching side, where we're making a specific plan for how this can, how they can move forward with some of those tangible things. So
I love it. I love it. I love how you're
Yeah.
able to use that and offer it in different ways based on whatever they need. And I like that you're doing it not necessarily around alcohol, but some sort of vice. So what would you like to leave with our audience today? What would you like them to know?
Wow. I'm like, whoa. I would just say that I was just talking about this today, that it's worth it to work through it. And I know that on the front end of change, it's so hard to get that momentum and that motivation, just to try to do something different. And it can seem like staying the same is comfortable, or at least familiar. And so for me, it's worth it to work through it, that you're worth it. The progress you're going to experience is worth it. The gifts and the fruits and the promises that are going to come on the other side are worth it. Even if you can't see it, all you have to do is just take that one step. You know what I mean? And for me, that was deciding that alcohol is no longer serving me. I've got to give it up. Everything else that's happened has just come from working through that and being clear on that. And, and so I would say it's worth it. It's worth it to work through whatever you're going through, and don't give up.
I love that. I love that. So where can the audience shower you with love? How can they connect with you?
So my website, b3bykristen.com. That's my website. It's really a hub for everything that I have going on, whether that be therapy services, coaching programs, information, guides, resources, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, on Instagram, I love the Instagram. It's just my name, Kristen Feemster, on Instagram. And on Facebook, it's facebook.com/B3 by Kristen. And right now, actually, I'm heading into a season where I'm relaunching my wellness program. It's called Be Well. And it's really helping women just with everything I just said about working through some habits and some cycles that are keeping you stuck. and figuring out healthier ways to cope with that, and then rebuilding your lifestyle around something that you can sustain. And so that's Be Well, and I'll be open for enrollment on that in March and going into April. I'm not sure when this will air, but that will definitely be feasible and something that people can look forward to. Regardless of when they hear this, it'll probably be open by then.
Yeah, great. That's what I love about podcasts. They're evergreen, but we'll put all that information in the show notes, and it'll definitely be out time. They'll be able to listen to all of that stuff.
Okay.
So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
If you connected with what you just heard, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can stay connected by following the Instagram Bianca Keisha, spelled Keisha, Kesha, or visiting the website authenticwednesday.com. Remember, authenticity is a journey, not a destination.